So good morning, everyone. Let's give it just one more moment while the sound buffers for folks as they're coming in. If you want to put in the chat where you're joining from, that's great. If you're a teacher and or supporting a teacher with a school garden and you want to make a note of what you teach or where you teach, that's appreciated. And I'm going to go ahead. We're going to, basically it's like a show and tell. And Mrs. Kemble was kind enough to say yes, that she would talk about her garden at Cranberry Elementary down in Northport. And so I'm going to hand the floor over to her. And then we have, after that, we have some slides from Mary Sanchez out at Inglewood Elementary. And then we may have another teacher joining us to answer some questions as well. So thank you so much. And before I talk too long, I'd love it if you could go ahead and feel free to bring up your slides and talk a little bit about what you teach and what you'd like to share with us today.
Okay, can you see my slides all right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to say hi to everybody. My name's Laura Kemble and I teach the Science Lab K-5 at Cranberry Elementary School in Northport. And I just wanted to share a little bit about the story of our garden. We started about 5 years ago. So hold on one sec. I'll just share a little bit about me first. I'm married with 2 kids. I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, CJ and Callie. 2 cats, Stella and Leela, and they're 7. They're sisters, believe it or not. They don't look like it. And then Daisy is our COVID dog. We adopted her last year over COVID, a year and a half, full of energy. I've been teaching for 27 years, 2nd grade for 10 years, 1st grade for 14, and Science Lab for the past 3 years. I'm originally from New Jersey, which is called the Garden State and famous for its Jersey tomatoes, although I've never gardened until I started our school garden 5 years ago. So if you're a newbie thinking to start a garden, I'm a great one to talk to. I didn't know anything about it and it's doing really well. 5 years ago at this very workshop, my friend and I went just to learn about plants, and then the extension crew, Stacy and Amber, sat on either side of us and said, you're the only school in Northport that does not have a garden, and we're going to help you start one. So my friend and I were always up for an adventure, and so we began. I taught 1st grade, she taught 4th grade, and we enlisted the help of both of our classes. And our extension support crew came out along with the family nutrition program of Claudia and Dina, and they came out to help us to start our garden. The kids built the 4 original beds. We laid cardboard down, we got mulch donated to us, and they did everything. They built the beds, they filled them with the soil, and they mulched the whole area, and you can see them with the rakes and the wheelbarrows and everything. This was the first year that we all learned to grow. My partner and I, neither one of us were gardeners before this. So we enlisted the help of our kids. And really that's what we had. We had our kids, we had us, we had the support of the extension crew and the FNP. We got plants from them. We learned to grow. We learned to water. You can see our little sprinkler in the center there. And one of the main lessons that we learned was that not all plants need the same amount of water. Our poor bean plants were drowning and the rest of them were okay. So we got rid of the sprinkler and we got the watering cans and the hoses. And that was one of the first lessons that we learned with our first 4-bed garden. The best part though was eating, of course. So we had lots of salad parties in our classes. We brought our 1st and 4th grade classes together. With our cucumber harvest and dill, we made some pickles. And we also enlisted the help of our awesome cafeteria staff to help us make kale chips in their ovens. Another thing we made was coleslaw with our 6-pound cabbage that we miraculously grew that year, which is bigger than some of our little 1st graders. Year 2, we had a little bit of bigger aspirations. Our master gardener that helped us out told us about the Lowe's Toolbox for Education grant. So we applied and we got the grant. So this was 2017, and the crew from our local Northport Lowe's sent out some helpers to build the new garden for us. That was part of the grant. And they added an irrigation system, they added weed barrier, they built our 10 garden beds and our 6 benches. We received a $5,000 grant and an additional $2,500 as part of their community project that they gifted to us. And we plan to add a pollinator garden with the extra money. Up at the left is my little map of what our plan looked like. We had to have a plan. On the bottom is what it looked like after they built everything. And then the kids came out and filled the beds with soil. And on the bottom picture, you can see most of a huge portion of the school out there planting at one time. We decided all to come out at one time. So I wouldn't suggest that, because that was something that was a lot and we were sort of in each other's way. So now we've staggered the schedule a little bit better. But we had 23 teachers and their classes involved that first year. And then Hurricane Irma came. So it was around that time period. So that was one of the barriers we had that year. Year 3, my partner and I changed positions. So we had a great thing going with our 1st and 4th grade classes. I became the science lab teacher. She became the tech lab teacher, and we didn't know what to do. We said, we don't have classes. How are we going to run this garden? And when we got back, another barrier, the weeds took over the summer. So we had to come back and deal with that. One of our first or second closings of the garden, it didn't go so well. So that's something we're always working on. So we decided, let's have an after-school garden club so we could continue with the garden. We loved this because after school, we had a lot more time to tend to the garden, to harvest the fruits, to cook and eat. We taught the kids how to cook. We had an air fryer, we had a steamer. And then we finally got to build our pollinator garden because we actually had the time to do it. So this was a really successful model for us in years 3 and 4. Then COVID came. The garden grew and we weren't allowed back and we had no kids to help us. We took a break in the fall and it grew. And luckily our awesome custodian went out there, got rid of the big weeds, and then it was down to this. So in the winter, I thought, well, I have 1st grade first thing in the morning. I love 1st grade working in the garden. They're just amazing. So I enlisted the help of my old 1st grade team. And I said, if I work the garden, will you guys eat the food with them? Will you prepare the food and help them out? And they were on board. So I had them come out in the morning, which I found that in the afternoon, it's a little hot for the kids to be out there. So in the morning was the perfect time. That's what I used to do with my 1st grade class. So we went out and we had a couple weeds to take care of. So we made this into a game, the biggest root contest. So they had to go around and we were talking about plant parts and we said, we want to find some roots. And they went and they got rid of every weed in the path of that garden and even the ones in the pollinator garden. So we were learning plant parts and we were cleaning up that garden that had drastically overgrown. We worked with 1st graders, planting little plants, planting seeds. We did lots of observations. With my first crew, I actually got a grant for tablets and we went out with tablets and took pictures and made observations. With this group, I didn't have the tablets to bring out, so we did the old-fashioned clipboards and we drew pictures and we measured. We compared the growth of the different plants in the different beds. And they learned how to take care of the garden by watering and weeding every time we went out. So my 1st graders were on a 6-day cycle. So every day I had a different class and I wouldn't see them again until the 7th day. And it worked out fine. And it was pretty neat too, because when they came out, they were always amazed at what had happened over the week. I had been there every day, but they would come out and they would notice all the new things growing and changing and the things that were harvested. So that was a great experience for me. And again, the eating. So we harvested every single day for quite a few weeks. We had 3 types of lettuce, cucumbers, tomatoes, purple beans, which when we cooked them, they turned green, which none of us knew, which was pretty cool. We bought 2 steamers so we could see them change. We had okra, which I'd never grown before, and a lot of the kids had never eaten before. They've never seen it before, so that was great. Kohlrabi, Swiss chard, beans I had said. So we just had so many things that we were harvesting this year, and they really enjoyed it. We also had lots of flowers growing in our garden. We had lots of sunflowers, calendula. The kids learned all about pollinators and their importance. They learned not to be afraid of bees. They would stand and just watch the sunflowers and watch the bees on the sunflowers. And we also had so many cucumbers that we learned how to make refrigerator pickles this year, which they loved. They had salad bar parties. All of the first grade teachers were on board. They did such a great job for me this year in creating this atmosphere. They also encouraged the kids to try new things like kohlrabi, which most of them had never heard of. They were amazed at how big it grew, and then a lot of them even liked it when they tried it. But all good things must come to an end, and we had to close our garden this year, but we did have a very successful semester. On the left is our pollinator garden, which, yes, it's overgrown because I found a baby bunny living in there, so I'm going to leave it for him to live there till he grows up and moves out. And I had the kids help us out. We collected cardboard to put on all of the beds from our cafeteria staff. And they collected for about a week or two for us, and the kids carried out the cardboard. We took out all the plants that weren't growing, transplanted any flowering plants into the pollinator garden that we thought might survive, and then covered it with weed barrier. We're hoping this will be the magic touch to have us all prepared for next year, that it won't be too overgrown this year. So until next year. Some things that we learned this year, because it's all about the learning, right? And first grade has so many plant standards. And I told the teachers, I said, I will take over the plants, you do the animals. They learned where our food comes from. It's not from Publix and Winn-Dixie and Walmart. It actually grows. They learned all the plant parts and which parts we eat. They learned about how plants grow and change, how the fruit is formed, where the seeds come from, and that we can take the seeds out of the fruit and grow them into new plants. A lot of them didn't understand that concept. We learned how to identify our plants and all the animals that were out in our garden, all different kinds of insects and furry creatures. Our bunny were out there that we could talk about as well. We learned how to care for a garden, how to properly water a garden, and to prune things, and to deadhead flowers and things like that. And most of all, they learned the appreciation for growing their own food and the time it takes for food to grow. They don't always understand that. Respecting the critters that were in our garden, down to the little millipedes that were crawling around. Trying new things. A lot of them tried okra, kohlrabi. Some of them had never had a tomato before, so they had tried those as well. And sharing with others, of course. Sometimes there wasn't enough for them to all take home, so they would take turns with that. For teaching ideas, my two favorite places are kidsgardening.org. They just have a ton of lessons on there, and they have lots of grant opportunities, which my friend and I are very excited about. We love to write grants and just keep building the money we have in our account for the garden so we can keep it going. So she'll write some of the grants. Sometimes we'll go get pizza and we'll sit there and write grants together, but they always have a great list of grants at kidsgardening.org. And Florida Harvest of the Month, they have sent us little brochures, activity packets, PowerPoints to teach about different harvests that are happening in Florida at that time of the month. So those are two of my favorites. Something that I did, I made little cards. Being first grade, I want them to see the words that they're learning. So I made cards for each plant we were growing in the garden, showing a picture of the leaves, the flower, and the fruit that would grow, so that they could identify the plants. And we just hooked them on the garden, and a kid in every class wanted to be the one to hook them up on the fence for me every day and take them down every day. But this just sort of helped them to take ownership for identifying the plants instead of asking me, but learning how to use sort of a reference material. One of the activities we did was to count how many plants we had, and then we would measure them. So 1 week we would measure, and then to show that there was growth, we would measure again the next week and the next. Realistically, we didn't get through 5 weeks. I'd probably do this for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks with first grade. They can't do the same thing for too long. So this was my first year with this, trying to create some activity lessons outside with them. And I also did an observation out there. So I needed to do something more meaty than just watering and weeding every time. So second thing we did was to identify the parts of the plants that we ate. So they would find 4 different parts that we ate. They would circle the part, they would draw a picture of the plant, and then they would write the name of the plant. So again, they were going back to the cards on the fence to get the word and to write those down. And by the end, some of them could even spell kohlrabi. It was pretty amazing. And the last thing, with my science background with data collection, I like them to start early with collecting data. So we went out to the beds and they had to count how many beds had a certain type of plant. So at this point, this was toward the end, they knew what they looked like, and they would use tally marks because that's something that's a first grade standard in math, to use tally marks to count. And they would use the tally marks to collect their data and then write the number. And then we would talk about which plants are the most successful in our garden for this semester. Now, with all of this, with my weed pictures and everything, is it worth it putting the time and energy in? And I would definitely say yes. I just want to show you a short little video. The sound is just music, so if that doesn't work, it's not the biggest deal. But I made a little video for a contest, and we didn't win, but it just gives you a picture of the kids out there and what it's like for them to be gardening. And it was about how the kids love their garden, if you didn't get that from all the love in there. So I just like to thank you for coming today, letting me share my garden. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I don't know if we're gonna do that at the end or now. That would be fine either way. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate, we've had some emails, and so I had an opportunity to see some of this, and really just enjoy seeing the kids enjoying the garden. So, because I haven't been able to be out and see the kids in the gardens as much this year. So thank you so much for sharing all the wonderful ideas and how your garden grew and changed and transformed. And is it okay if, so we're getting a little bit of feedback in the chat, which is great. If you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. I do have some slides from Mary Sanchez out of Inglewood Elementary. Unfortunately, she did have a schedule conflict come up, but she was kind enough to send us her PowerPoint. And so we're going to go through that very briefly. And then we're also joined by Whitney Tucker, who is with Ashton Elementary. And so she's going to talk very briefly about her garden if she doesn't mind being put on the spot. And I'll just kind of share some general ideas for garden engagement. But I do want you to have opportunities to speak with each other and ask the teachers questions. So before I get too long, Amy asked, what is the organization you got the grants from again? I missed that. And I don't know if Lowe's still does it. Sometimes people come in and out of
it's up there. Yeah, I looked the other day to try and get the picture. It's Toolbox for Education, okay, and it's through Lowe's. Okay. If you just Google that, it should come up.
Okay. So wonderful. I'm glad to hear they're still doing that. And one of the things I noticed too is sometimes the grants, there's just cycles to them. So sometimes if you miss one, if you note it on your calendar, you might be able to go back the subsequent year and find it. Bear with me one moment. I want to go ahead and share my screen.
Hello, my name is Mary Sanchez. I teach second grade at Inglewood Elementary School. We are a school of 600 students at the very southern tip of Sarasota County School District. Hello. Our garden is supported by the great efforts of Mindy, as well as our amazing administrative team, PTA, and school families. Every year, we plant our fall garden with the intention of celebrating Stone Soup, which is the story of town folk getting together to create a meal, giving very little to create a lot. Every grade level tends to our garden, and the way I have chosen to coordinate this effort is to ask for a garden representative at each team level to pass on my communications to the teams so that they know when they can get out with their students and take turns to plant whenever they can get out. UF Extension has provided us with a variety of heirloom vegetables and just amazing snacks. So much of it does actually not get into our stone soup, but right into the hands and mouths of our precious little kids. UF Extension provided us with some plants for our spring garden, which were planted and then moved to a hydroponic tower due to our construction on campus. And it was an amazing hit. The children would actually just walk by and nibble as they went. And I actually have a lot of teachers eager to use the hydroponic tower again next year. The good news is that you don't need a lot of space on your campus. The materials and plants provided by UF can be put in a very small area and enjoyed whatever kind of situation you may have. I was also able to get our little critters from the butterfly garden into each and every classroom. Yes, that's 6 classroom times 6 levels. We had all kinds of activity from the monarch butterfly to the spice bush swallowtail butterfly in our butterfly garden here. And I really wanted to make the effort just to get the garden into the classrooms to keep the interest high. Again, because of the construction, the children were not able to get out into the garden as much. So it was my intention to bring the garden indoors so that they would have that piece of their education still alive. Anytime you can get your students outside is a good thing. Our art teacher does a bird event with all grade levels outside. Our science teacher, of course, has the children outside doing all kinds of life science. And individual teachers use the outdoors to teach math, of course, geometry, and they often get outside just to use chalk on the pavement to provide the children their lessons. And we enjoy our Florida weather whenever we can. All of these things promote time with the children to interact with Mother Nature. Anytime you can get. Thank you for your time today and listening. My name is Mary Sanchez. I can be reached at the phone number below, or you can always email me. And I would love to have you stop by and give you a tour of our campus. I'll be the one in the Wampy hat. Here I am pictured with our team and our administrative team, Mrs. Zarnicki and Mr. Grossenbacher. Thank you again. Thank you for your time today and listening. My name is Mary.
Okay. I'm going to go to the chat. So thank you. I see you answered the question in the chat. And bear with me one moment. I'm going to go ahead and pull up some more slides. So Ms. Tucker from Ashton Elementary, while I bring up some slides, would you be kind enough to talk about the school garden that you had started and then what happens next? So share a little bit about your program and how that evolved and what happens next.
Sure. Can you hear me? I'm on a new computer, so I'm not sure if it's working or not. All right. I started a school garden, Lord, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, mainly because I had a parent in my room who did grants, and she kept pestering me about doing a grant. And I finally went, fine. And another teacher had started the garden, but it went nowhere. She had one little garden box and that was it. And she didn't do anything with it. So I was like, would you be really offended if I added to it? She's like, oh, that'd be great. Just go ahead and take it. So I wrote the grant, and surprise upon surprises, because my parent was involved, I got the grant. And then I was like, oh, I don't garden. So I had no idea what to do. I saw, oh, UF Extension, I bet they garden. So I contacted Mindy, and she was wonderful because she came out and she looked at it, and I said, I've got these 4 plots and I need to do something with it. And I contacted Big Earth, and I used part of the money to get some soil. And so we did all of that, and the garden grew, and it was huge. And my kids loved it. And other classes would come by and they would hang out for a while. And I kept encouraging everyone to show up. I'm like, oh, just go in, go pick, because I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And then Mindy would come by, and her people would come by, and they truly, I don't know this year, I do know what I did without them, because this year our garden sucked. But the last 2 years, they were awesome. So I ended up, I had to use the rest of my money or I would lose it. So we are now up to like 11 plots, and I have an area that's over by the building. Ashton's this big, giant circular building in the center. And then we have gobs of portables and a couple of spare buildings on the side. So my principal gave me this one section. I've got like 11 little garden plots there. We still use the sprinkler, although the funny things that I've learned, like the first year that I had the garden and I had a couple different sprinklers because I wanted the kids to figure out which sprinkler worked the best. And we had to move it. And the sprinkler had a key back then where you had to like put it in the little socket thing and turn the water on. Mm-hmm. And so one of my kids, I was like, just go move the sprinkler, because it was someone's job. And she said, well, how do I do that? And I said, just kink the hose and move it, because she tried to get the key. And I teach first grade. I have 6 and 7-year-olds, and I teach what's called REACH, the advanced work class. So they're supposed to be a little bit with it than a regular ed class. So I'm like, just kink it. You don't need the key. She's like, oh, okay. And the 2 kids came back rather wet. I'm thinking, wonder how that happened. And I didn't, I just like skip it, kept going on with my lesson. And so after a little bit, I said, so how did it go with kink and the hose? She said, well, we really didn't know what kink was. I said, oh, so what did you think it meant? She said, well, we kind of figured, kink, kick. They both begin with a ka, they end with a ka. So we kicked it. And how'd that work for you? She's like, well, it didn't. So I was like, oh, vocab. Look what I do teach now. We have all of the different plots. We've got all these different things growing. Right now, there's still sunflowers. Last year during COVID, I was the one that shut down the garden, which was a complete and total drag. We used to have this one custodian that did so much for us, and then he left. So now, like, we're out there weeding. I like things like the kids will go out with rulers, and I'm like, all right, we're going to work on our measurement today. And I'll send them all out with rulers, and they take the different size rulers and the yardsticks, and a couple of them had the tape measures, and it was cool to watch them with all of those different tools talking about the measurement, what they got. We've learned how to weed. We had to learn what's the difference between a weed and a plant, because we lost several plants during some of our weedings.
It happens.
It does. It was okay. It wasn't a big deal. One of the teachers that I work with had a grant for pollinators for native plants. So Kelly came and planted a whole bunch. She's like, do you care? I'm like, oh, heavens no, go for it. So we went out there and we planted a bunch of different wildlife plants. And then Kelly put up this big giant sign that had all the different plants that we had planted and what their jobs were and what they did. I liked the gated area that you guys have, Laura, what you had. I thought that was really cool because we don't have a gate, so there's nothing to hang things on.
Yeah.
When I first wrote the grant, when I had to spend all the money or lose it, I bought a big giant slate, like a big giant chalkboard, because my goal had been for our dad's group to build one of those things that you see in construction sites that have the plastic that you lift up so you can pull out the plans. And I wanted the slate back there so the kids could write on it and say what we were growing and when it was planted and when we could harvest it and all of those things. But that never happened with the dad's group. So I have retired after 35 years of teaching. This was my last year. And the garden needed to go to someone else because there's all of these plots and that's going to look really tacky sitting there with absolutely no one taking care of it. And I'm thinking, oh, that'll be trashy. It'll be bad. No, bad. So, and it's not like the principal set up, like the guy that used to do our old custodian, he has a brick pathway that goes around it and he laid down all of the weed barrier. So things aren't supposed to grow up, but they still do because weed barrier really doesn't work that well. But it needs to be used. We put, at one time I put a weather station in there because I wanted to drag more teachers in there and I wanted them to use it. So I figured if I had all of this stuff, their kids would like leave the line, which they do, and go check it out. So we had, I had a weather vane, the wind vane that spins to tell you what direction it's going in, and a rain gauge. So we could measure how much rain we got. Sometimes it just measured how much sprinkler was out there. Whatever. It was still measurement. There was a thermometer so they could see what the temperature was at that point in time. I figured anything that I could get out there to expose them to it was better than nothing. And I want to say it had a solar light. Not that anyone's supposed to be there at night because every school is locked down nowadays, but I just thought, hey, someone walking by, they jumped the fence, science. We got measurement, we're good. They'll get something. But anyways, I have a 5th grade teacher who is part of the Go Green Club. And then the science teacher actually sent me an email and she's like, Whitney, if you have no one to take over your garden when you leave. And I was like, oh my gosh, you guys could work together. This would be awesome. So now instead of people coming to me and saying, you have a tomato out there, is it okay if we pick it? And me saying, you really don't have to ask, just take it. I have no plans for any of this stuff. My kids eat what I bring. And if it's not there, someone else should be eating. When I was a little kid, my parents had a garden, and not that we really grew anything, but we still had it. When my kids were growing up, we attempted a garden. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but they had things grown. Parents nowadays don't have that luxury of time. So I just felt that we needed to expose our kids to it. So I don't want them to read about it in a book. I want them to do it. I want them to plant the seeds and see that, if you plant a sunflower seed, you're not going to get a tomato plant. I wanted them to understand that difference. And sometimes, like I said, I am not a gardener. I hence why my children didn't have really great gardens, because it's not my thing. It's not something I do. I like to go to the store and just buy stuff. But I felt that it was important that our kids are exposed to that and that they see it, and that they understand that there are things that you pick. One year we had a bunny that came and ate all of our carrots. Hysterical, because he would leave the tops, and he was really skilled because he just kind of leave them right there and take the carrot part. But I thought it was cool that my kids could see that carrots grew underground. And then another year, well, I think it was that same year, they planted everything so close together that nothing really grew. And so then we had to talk about how if we had spaced it a little bit better, and if you didn't have a ruler, what part of your body could you use to space it? This year, when I had to do it myself because no volunteers were allowed because of COVID, I was like, oh, just use your hand. Put your hand down, put the next one at your wrist. They got really tired of that. I gave one kid like a handful of cucumbers and said, put 2 or 3 seeds in each of your little holes. she came back. She's like, I still have 7 holes. I was like, well, where are your cucumber seeds? She's like, well, I planted them all. Did you count them? Oh, I forgot. Those are going to be some yummy cucumbers.
And thank you for sharing, because these are some of the stories and some of the things that we don't know, that kids don't know until we're doing it, and they won't ever know if we don't teach them. And so it's really nice to hear about all the many reasons, all the many things you can learn in a school garden, as complicated as you want to make it, as simple as you want to make it. And one of the reasons I was glad you could talk was because when you did have like the weather vane, and you did have like the pollinator signs out and everything, trying to encourage students as they went past to take notice of that space. So thank you very much. And I wanted to have more pictures of your school garden in there, and I only have this one. Can you see it up there with the pollinator sign?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a little bit out of sequence, but this is the sign about the pollinator plants. So sometimes it's even just having signage in your space. So if you're doing it like Mrs. Kemble, where you have it hung on the fence, and there's things that kids can identify, if you have a sign on a stake, and something that makes them stop and look. Because for a lot of us, that if they don't garden, if the teacher doesn't garden, they see something and they might glance if something's blooming and pretty, but otherwise they might not stop long enough to notice the space. So before I go through some of my slides, I am curious to, for virtue of time, I want to make sure if anybody has questions for Mrs. Kemble and Ms. Tucker, if you guys can go ahead and put them in the chat if you have questions. So we have someone that's teaching BPK, the Toolbox for Education, thank you for that. And then, and you're right, Kids Gardening, sometimes they post links for other grant information as well. And then, so I am gonna go ahead, if you have questions for them, go ahead and put them in the chat. And then I'm gonna go ahead and flip through some slides real quick, just talking about a little bit of ideas for engagement. And some of them you've heard and seen little snippets already, because I tend to steal things if I see things working. It works for me. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that I've had the pleasure of being able to go to more than one school. And I know sometimes the teachers are teaching and you're kind of captive at your location. So that's why I was really excited to do the show and tell today. Mine doesn't have as many pretty pictures, but if we're talking about engagement, you're wanting engagement with your school garden, with the students, with the staff, with your administration, and with your volunteers. And when we say staff, it's not just your fellow teachers. As you've already heard, a lot of times there's other staff that work at the school campus that can be incredibly helpful to the school garden. So include them as much as you can. Sometimes that's, sharing produce and just having good communication and building those relationships. And that engagement that you heard about, I think, is one of the reasons that even though there's been transitions with both of your schools and also with Englewood, you've been able to weather those transitions because of the engagement that you guys have encouraged at your schools. So if we're talking about student engagement, basically let them get excited, let them get dirty, let them go out there and get wet. And then we discovered that they don't know what kink means, and that's valuable information, and a good learning time. And let them explore and observe and share. And you heard some of the oohs, and well, you didn't get to hear the oohs and ahs in this video from Mrs. Kemble. I did get to hear them in another one. And the kids, if they get a chance to actually spend a little time out there and look, and even with bugs, they go from like ew to ooh over time. So, and they're really willing to try foods they wouldn't otherwise when they see their peers trying the food, and they're curious because they've seen something grow. So I would say if you can, if you have enough space, maybe leave one of the beds somewhat unplanted. I wouldn't normally recommend that at a community garden, but for a school garden, kids like to have an opportunity to dig sometimes and to root around for bugs and stuff. So that's a fun thing to do, have a bug viewer. They can pass that around. It may not have air holes, so don't leave the critters in there too long. Give the kids some clear instructions before you go outside. And you may notice that some of the kids that don't do well in the classroom setting sometimes do better when they're outside. And so praise that when you see it. Would you guys say that, is that true? Sometimes you see some of the kiddos that don't sit well enjoying the space outside and become a little bit of a garden leader?
Yeah, I give them jobs. I had one that was very hyperactive, and he was looking for hornworms the year we were infested with hornworms. And I can't stand hornworms, like they gross me out. And he went around and he found all of them, and that was his job, and he loved it. But in the classroom, he was all over the place. So yeah, I love those kids that I can give a job to and they really like just take it to heart.
Aww. Yeah, they're big and juicy in a very interesting way. Yeah.
Yeah, we had one that was about 5 or 6 inches long and yeah, about an inch thick. And I just, no.
I know they supposedly turn into big, beautiful moths. And if Wilma's in here, if she's allowed to unmute, she's welcome to educate me, but yeah. And then some of the student engagement pieces you guys have already talked about, like all those opportunities to collect data, for them to journal, for them to communicate with each other, like they can have jobs, they can be on a team, they can work collaboratively. In those communication pieces, we're learning the vocabulary they do and they don't know. Out in that physical setting, we might not know it otherwise. And then they get a chance to connect some of the stuff that they read about back to the physical space. So one of the things that had been mentioned was about having that opportunity for kids to be out in a garden, because sometimes they don't have that opportunity at home. And I've been in a school garden in Northport, which is not a metropolis. And there was a 3rd grade student that was grinning from ear to ear. He had never played in the dirt before, and he was in 3rd grade. And so it was just like, even if it's just opportunities like that, you don't have to teach them AP biology for them to find value in the space. So let them be curious. You can tie it back to curriculum, volume, measurement, fractions. If you have an administration that wants to make sure that all of your time is being used really well, if you have a deck box outside and you can put some rulers or measuring tape or something out there. So if you do have like a drop-in assessment, you have some stuff handy. For student engagement, kind of take notes from the teachers that have already said it, but like signage is helpful, anything that draws interest as people pass by. And so like it could be riddles, it could be puns, and that could be one of the things other classes can have fun contributing to the space. Like what's orange and sounds like a parrot? And of course it's a carrot. So you can kind of like, or what grows here? Because that also, when we're talking about ID and how weeds and plants can look very, very similar. I know, especially with carrots as they crop up. Weather station's really great idea, and it's a great way for other classes to have reason to stop by your space. Add some art and whimsy. Cranberry, you have a wonderful sign out by your gate that really encourages people to just relax and enjoy the space, which I think is really, it really sets the tone for people being able to enjoy the space, even if they're working in it. And then let that student interest steer the teachers and staff support. So you may not be hearing a lot from other staff saying, hey, we want to be part of your garden, but as they hear their kids interested, that helps lead the teachers. And then reach out, because some of the classes, depending on where your garden is located, if you're off to the side, they may not, I've even heard from teachers, sometimes they may not be aware that a teacher has a classroom garden on the other side of the campus. So it's handy if you do want to reach out, if you are looking for engagement from other classes, because maybe they just want to come visit the space. Maybe they don't want to actively garden, but maybe you can put them on a gnome hunt or a scavenger hunt, or offer like, hey, I have cucumbers or tomatoes. Why don't you feel free to come and pick? Or if you have seeds that sprouted, or even if you have a seed packet in an empty spot and you want them to come out and try their hand at planting. Creating a schedule. Some schools, they have different classes do the watering. And I think you were hearing a little bit about that, about watering schedules. And sometimes it's a couple of kids that you trust. That might be one of the activities that they go out and help with moving the water around. And the kids do like watering with water cans and stuff like that. Is that a fair statement? Kids like to water. Kids like to look for bugs.
Yeah, if we don't water, they get very upset. They always want to water, yeah. I had to buy extra watering cans this year, so we had enough.
And it's a good reminder for, like, I know sometimes I can forget to water my garden at home, and we grow the most in dry season. So it's a good thing that the kids like to do it. And then for staff engagement, you can kind of just do it by coaxing interest. There's Florida Ag in the Classroom and some of the other resources that are free. If you have like a shared break room or anything like that, you can just kind of leave some of those free materials out where other teachers might see them. And they might realize that there's opportunity for them to use that space for teaching their curriculum. And it doesn't have to be intimidating. And then you've already kind of heard, you can go into this without having a gardening background, and vegetable plants are not meant to live a long life. So you didn't plant an oak tree and kill it. It was a vegetable plant, and the goal is to hopefully get it going long enough that you get to eat something from it. And if it doesn't, it's a learning opportunity, which is what you're trying to teach your kids, is to be resilient and pick yourself up and keep going and try again, and observe and see what you need to change. You can also share snacks from the garden, and then issue invites to the other teachers or share stories with them, so they can kind of visualize how a garden is used and what do the kids get out of it. And I love the funny stories I get to hear out of the school gardens. You can speak at the PTO. Sometimes, if you're really lucky, you might be able to get away with having a line item for a budget from the PTO. So if you do need to replenish some of your supplies and maybe you don't qualify for the family nutrition program support, you might have like an easy way to access money for some of your materials, so you don't have to dip in your own pocket too much. And then there are a lot of grants. Some were oddly timed this past year, but with COVID, but I think there's a lot of interest in growing food right now. So I would be surprised if some of the grants aren't up and running with a lot of enthusiasm over the next year. And then you could parent work day, host a garden shower if you need supplies, like a baby shower, that type of thing. But as much as you can, my goal for school gardens is hopefully that it's not one singular teacher out there doing all the maintenance in the space, because that can be hard. And so as much as you can engage other people to enjoy the space, so then that way, hopefully if you need to reach out for a little bit of support, there's some extra hands that are available. And make the case to the administration if they're not sure why you have a school garden and how the time is being spent out there. Some of the things that you can do is incorporate the school into themes and events, like when we heard about the stone soup. You can use the garden to showcase some of the school mission, character initiatives, learning goals. Sometimes people have like the seven habits, measuring geometry fractions connected to curriculum. And then admin, I would hope, is going to be supportive of your school garden. And the ways that they can do that is, hopefully patching you through to funding, whether it's like materials, maintenance support, share communications about your garden when you want to have that shared out, understand that the garden is not always going to be pretty, and hopefully be able to tolerate that. And when in doubt, plant some flowers. It's a very nice distraction when your garden is going through fluctuations of crops. And then some of the reasons why for school gardens, agriculture is still a huge component of the economy in Florida. So it's like one of the three main pillars of Florida economy. So if we are hoping that some of our students want to stay in Florida and work in Florida, having that vocabulary background, even if it's something like kink, think of how many jobs are out in the community that involve landscaping and irrigation and plumbing and all of that. So there's lots of different careers that even just having that vocabulary and a little bit of familiarity, and so they have an opportunity to learn if this is anything that they want to know more about. And more of the careers in agriculture are requiring higher education. So it's good to start building those skills and that familiarity now so they can build on that as they grow and age. Health benefits, they're more likely to make good choices if they're gardening and also getting nutrition education. So if you do qualify for family nutrition program, I would tap into them for some of that nutrition education. There's definitely, I find it therapeutic to be out and about in the garden space. Is there benefit sometimes too if the kids are just a little wily, get a chance to go outside and enjoy the garden?
Yeah, I had an observation out there as well, and my assistant principal said the same thing. She said it's so zen out here, like it's just for everybody, you know, and even for teachers, just walk out there, sit on the bench.
Yeah. Wonderful. So there's lots of reasons to have a garden. And main thing is if you have one, just try to make the best use of it as you can. And because it is an outdoor classroom. And if you can have any kind of outdoor seating near the space, I think that's incredibly helpful. So that way, if you are having a little bit of a mini lesson, or if some of the kiddos just need to sit down because it's hot, or maybe you need to sit down or have a place to set something, if you can incorporate some seating, that's a good way to be able to linger and accomplish a few more things, and have storage out there, like deck boxes and stuff. But so I do want to look in the chat and see if we have any questions. Yes, the best ideas are someone else's. That's why I'm very, very fortunate you guys were willing to share about your school gardens today. And then Judith Hill teaches, I'm assuming autism spectrum disorder K to first, hands-on work, so much better. Yes, they do have challenges with vocabulary and communication, understandable. Wonderful way to help them learn to work together. I agree. And we do have quite a few of our schools. The special education classes are the primary caretakers of that garden space. I remember it being at one of the schools in Northport, and we were doing a planting, and one of the young students had vision impairment. And so he was feeling the soil, and he said it's softer than a blanket. And he was just so delighted. Like it's still one of my favorite memories of being out in the school garden. So, so yes, as much as you can incorporate everybody in your campus to enjoy the space, there's a lot of value there. And then also understand there are some kids that are going to have some sensory issues, that they love things and they want to touch them. And then there's going to be some kids where they're going to need some time before they want to touch certain things. And that's because we're all people and have preferences. Where is a good place to, magnifying glasses for students to use? I think the little ones and the bug viewer. It's a big online, maybe kind of sounds like amazing, but it's different. You know, you can find them online. And the kids really do enjoy playing with bugs. So yeah. If you were looking for, say you didn't want to have a movie day and you wanted to have some time outside, weed competitions and looking for bugs, hands down. Yeah.
We do fill the wheelbarrow, which class can fill it with weeds, and that was popular this year. I just wanted to Judith's talk about classes working together. When I had first grade, we were reading buddies with the pre-K class. And we would take them out there. So it's nice to buddy up with someone. Also, when I was with the fourth grade classes, once testing season came around, it was harder for them to get outside. So that was sort of our model, where we paired up younger grades and upper grades. So because of the testing, or in the case of the little kids needing that mentorship with the older kids. So yeah, that worked out really well for us. So we continue that.
I love that. That's wonderful. And especially because you can't be everywhere in the garden all at one time. So that's a really good solution, in a really nice way of building team and kind of crossing across the campus when maybe you wouldn't be able to otherwise. Yeah. So if anybody has any, I'm going to unmute in case anybody does have a question. I'm going to stop share But so if you do have a question, type it now, or I'm going to unmute you very quickly. So if you want to say hi, or if you have a question, and then we will have an hour break, and then we're going to be doing how to be Florida friendly in your edible garden from 12:30 to 1:30 with Wilma Holly, our Florida friendly landscaping specialist. So any questions for our teachers? Any questions for us? So quiet. This means you guys were thorough. So there's thank you. And then you had mentioned kids gardening was one of your favorite. Do you guys have any other, like, I know we had a couple teachers earlier that were trying to engage more with the like science, potentially, you know, educating multiple classes, multiple grade levels. Is there a go-to that you thought was handy for curriculum? Like, I don't know, is it on Pinterest?
A lot of the ideas that I got were from Pinterest or just things that I saw around town that I'd be like, oh, we can use that. And then the grant that I got was through the Community Foundation, I believe. And that was like 3 or 4 years ago.
And we have had it in the past sometimes too, if there's a master gardener already partnered at a school, sometimes if they have funds, they may be able to do like small grants. Not necessarily the scope of Lowe's grant, but some smaller grants too, if it's needed. So, and then the family nutrition program is also a great resource to reach out to as well. If you're serving like Title I, if more than half your student population is eligible for SNAP. And I'll have more information about them in our last session of the day. So
yeah, they're amazing. We started with them 5 years ago and missed them this year. But they are absolutely amazing with the kids. We did fourth grade and first grade did nutrition lessons I think it was monthly. But just getting them to eat different foods. Even me, I never ate spinach, and Dina had me eat spinach, and I'm like, I love this. So the kids absolutely love their lessons. So if you can do that, it's well worth it.
Yeah.
Another thing, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Another thing for fundraising, a lot of the local stores and restaurants will do this where they'll give you a percentage of earnings for a day. So I know like Five Below, and we've done it with like Boca Lupo, and you can advertise with your school community and say, go to this place on this day, and we get 10% of the earnings if you mention us. So that's another way just to get little bits of money. And that's sort of what we try to do, just to build our fund. So when we need soil or something like that, we can, go out and get it. And Heather, yes, I did do this in the lab this year. This is the first year, but just with first grade, because I had them in the morning, because it's just too hot. I used to have them in the afternoon. It was just too hot. They couldn't handle it. So I did it every day for spring. I think we started February, and we went out every day for the whole spring semester, because their standards are lots of plant standards, and the teachers typically would rather do the animal standards, and I like to do the plants with the garden, so it worked out well for us.
That's out of curiosity, how did you come to that conclusion? Like, what goes into that planning, that communication to kind of like iron that out? Because I think that's what's missing a lot of times, especially if there's fluctuation in the staff situation.
Yeah, most of the staff was involved that first or second year. Some of them weaned out because it's a lot of work to get them out there, and you have to be organized. I always went every Friday with my kids because we had testing on Friday and it didn't take the whole morning. So we would do our tests and go outside. For science lab, again, it's just too hot later. So the first period of the day, and then I requested to have first grade first period next year as well, and they agreed to it. So, but that was my old team. So the big part of it was I wasn't going to be able to harvest the food with them, or not harvest. I could harvest. I just couldn't cook the food, and I couldn't have the salad parties. So I just didn't have time. But I was literally running upstairs to get back up here for kindergarten because we don't have any time between classes. But I made it up in 1 minute. It wasn't too bad. But I just stuck to first period for this year. And then every year it changes, but garden club sort of covered the upper grades. We would do grades 3, 4, and 5 for the after school garden club. So I would introduce it to them in first grade. Everybody did it. And then in third grade, again, they could do it after school. And the parents loved it because they didn't have to pay for aftercare. So it was a win-win. But you just need lots of helpers after school, Well,
because you had how many in your garden club at one point?
We had 4, I want to say 40 or more. I think we may have had 60 sign up, but they come in and out, but 40 was a lot. We'd like to keep it probably like 25, and it weans down to that, the ones that are really interested, and they are really interested. So it's really fun to work with those kids who really want to be there, you know, and that's how we got our pollinator garden built. We just we had all the materials for a while and we just didn't have the time. And last year, right before, it was last year right before COVID, but we got that all built and we were just so excited. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
And that would be, so yeah, the younger kids seem to peter out. They seem to do better in the cooler hours. Some of the older kids can tolerate some of the warmth and go later in the day, what I've noticed.
Yeah. And this year we were lucky because it was cool almost the whole spring semester.
It was
were
a beautiful
lucky.
weather year.
It didn't
Dry,
get hot till the last 2 weeks and we were so lucky. I mean, I even have pictures of them with their hats and their gloves and their jackets because in February, March, it was a little chilly for them in the morning.
And we had comment also about the food program. Yeah. And so I would say you had mentioned Dina, and she's with the family nutrition program. Dina and Claudia are some of my favorite people. They're very engaging, work really well with kids. And I've come into, like, if I show up and I have Dina or Claudia there, and it's like, you'd think it's like a pop star. They're really excited to see them. They know they're going to eat something yummy and have a good time and learn. So it's always a good day when they're around. So, so thank you guys so much for all your time. I think we answered all the questions. And I think you guys were so thorough and lots of wonderful ideas and more than I could ask for. So thank you very much for joining us. And are you receptive if people reach out with a question? Are you going to be off for the summer and no email?
No, you definitely email. I'll be checking in on the garden and
Fair enough. And then Whitney, you are retiring, right? So I may reach out for other school garden related projects at some point in the future, if and when you know, but I'll let you relax a little bit first, couple months. So thank you guys. I hope you have a great lunch and we will see you at 12:30. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, guys. Really.